Alright, how's it going? This is Sam Wilker with thinkparticle.com, and in this video we're going to talk about the TP Toolkit. This is part of the visual documentation series where we talk about each object in the TP Toolkit plugin. So if we go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D, once we've installed our TP Toolkit plugin, we can go ahead and open it up. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the renderers. So we've already done some videos on the emitters and dynamics, and we're going to do some on utilities. And these should all be available online as you're watching this now. In this video, we're going to talk about each of the renderers. So most of the videos have their own, or most of the objects have their own video, or like the TP matter objects, because they're so similar, and the TP dynamic collision emitters are so similar, they had collective videos. The renderers are like that too. They're pretty constant. So we're going to just have one particle emitter. Actually, we're going to have, I think, 3. No, we're going to have 5. 5 emitters that we'll show you briefly how to set up. And then we'll show you how to render in different forms. So we have our very, very first thing, nothing. We don't render anything. We actually need to have particles. So let's go ahead and start by looking at our emitters. So the first one is, let's do ticks. Okay. So we have our ticks of simple ticks right here, and we're going to emit particles from those simple ticks. Okay, this is a lot of particles, guys. This is going to take a little bit to render. What we're doing first is a hair render. Okay, so let's go ahead and drag these out so we can focus on them and hide the rest. So we're going to call this Hide Me. Scary ex-girlfriends. Alright, so we have our simple emitter, which then emits particles from the TP particle emitter. Let me use a hair render. Now, one thing you need to concentrate on really quick, hyperfocus, really important, very basic. When you add hair to any object in Cinema 4D, it natively adds the hair render. It does that when you add a new hair material. But when you add this object, you need to make sure you right-click and set the hair render to render. Otherwise, it won't render. So we have our material right here, which is under the group of TP material. We have 2 of those right now because we have one for our TP renderer with the hair, and one layer that came in with the Pyro clusters. And we have a lot of layers in this scene because that's each object that the TP toolkit works with has its own individual layer. And you can group those later manually if you'd like, but when you bring in objects in the scene, you're going to have maybe a few duplicates, but something to keep in mind. Anyways, you have your hair material right here, and we'll keep this open and hit render. So we have that light right there, and that light is going to illuminate our particles, and it's also going to have lights render, so I'll bring those out in a moment. That's really bright. Holy crap. So, this guy, okay, is way too bright. And I don't know why. Give me just a moment. Alright, so I figured out what the problem was in this scene, which you don't have, so that doesn't matter for you. But one thing you can check sometimes is the default light was checked on. That actually didn't cause it. But this light right here. So we're using the light renderer as well. Okay. And this light renderer is taking from the TP toolkit. So we're going to take that object and we're going to display those as boxes so we can actually see each one collectively. Each one of those little boxes inside of it has a light. Okay. And that light, the decay, was set to 25, but something tells me the scale was a little bit bigger than 25. So that would be why. Okay, so the particle scale was being adjusted. So in this case, we're going to want to set that to something like 2. So we're going to go with the global, okay, to set that, okay. And we can hide that now. Okay, so we have our light renderer and our hair renderer, and this is what it looks like. Okay. Still too bright. So we're going to set that to 1. Still too bright. And we'll set that to 50%. There you go. So more along the lines of what we're looking for. And we can add more particles to the scene. More along the lines of what we originally had. Still only 1/10 of what we originally had, but it will render much faster for that purpose. So our hair is being illuminated. These little gray specular dots are being, or not even specular, these little gray dots are being illuminated by these lights. And they have transparency applied. So this is just a white value that I've put in. So you can actually just change the transparency with this slider right here. I find that a little bit easier. You have your thickness. In this case, I changed the thickness values to 0.25 for each of these with to make these little specks smaller. And then a white, just a white value. And one of the things you can do with particles is like add some hue variation. And that will give you, I guess, well, a variation in your hue. But we aren't going to talk too much about that. So we'll just go ahead and quickly render that preview to show you what that looks like. So you have red and the hue variation, and you have purple, so it looks a little less, I guess, splashed out right there, but still works. Okay, so that is the hair renderer in a nutshell. You have your particles that come out with the hair renderer, and we are using a point render. It's kind of like Krakatoa for Cinema 4D. We're using hair to render each individual point. Every point is rendered with hair in this thinking particle group. So let's go ahead and separate those a little bit better. We'll make them kind of purple, pinkish, so you can see them. Every one of those dots is rendered with hair. So let's leave that at ticks. Okay, we can also use velocity. So the speed at which these particles travel will then be applied, and then it will use the velocity settings, which we'll drop down in just a moment after it renders, to give those kind of that motion blur look. In this case, they're traveling pretty slow, so we're going to set it to a velocity of 15%. And again, we're going to change the particle count so we can render these faster. So as you can see, the particles are flying out from the emission. And now you can really see how that looks, because the hair render is using velocity. So that's just a straight line. Actually, it's not a straight line technically, I don't think. But it moves along its velocity, which is the direction of travel plus speed and time, or I don't remember how to calculate it exactly. But anyways, that's what velocity can do. And you can get these really cool looks with that. But I usually keep that at a lower value. If I want to create trails of particles, then I'll use the trail. So if we turn off the particle emitter and go to hair renderer and use the TP Toolkit particle group instead, we'll get these trails of particles, and they will follow these particles, whether they're straight lines or curved, turbulent velocities. That's what that will do. And you can set that particle material, the hair material, with the particle material. The particle group you can change just by dragging in your particle groups. You can choose whether to have subgroups or not. You can have a position render, which is a point render, a velocity render, or a trail render. And this can limit your trails so that, say, you have a particle move for 50 frames, right? For some reason that didn't work. Oh, right, because we don't have any of that particle group in the scene. Okay, so 49 frames, right? Those trails go on forever. But if we limit them to, say, 5 frames, this is great for doing things like fireworks and things like that. Right there, okay? And then you have the ability to, when a particle dies, the particle can run out, which means it will take those frames that would have originally moved. So I guess we'll look at this particle right here. So this is the particle. This is 5 frames, so cut it into 5 segments. Each, if it runs out, it will slowly cut, or it will per frame cut 1 segment off until it's gone. Okay. Then you also have the ability to have it remain. When the particle dies, it will just stay there, or it can just remove. So say it's a 25 frame trail, and then that particle dies, the whole thing just disappears. And that can be really convenient in some cases as well. So next, the light renderer. How do we get those lights there? Let's add a sphere and have those lights illuminate the sphere. So as you can see, these little lights are moving along, are above the sphere and in it and things like that. And you get really cool looks with that, by the way. I love doing that. I think it's just beautiful to have these little specular highlights on these things. So we have the TP light renderer, and when you add that to your scene, you can just add your, it comes with a light object, which is actually usually just below it, but because it shows up in the scene, if you don't hide it, here, let's go ahead and move it down, okay. If you don't hide that light in your scene, it will render. So what I've done is I've moved it to a TP render geo, or in this case, just we'll call it TP render null object, and hidden that, but kept it visible underneath. So it's visible in renderer, but not in the editor. And then it's not visible in either in the parent object. So that makes it visible in the render, but only when it's cloned. In this case, which is what we're doing here. You have your particle group and the ability to use subgroups. And then in this case, we're gonna show you how to use also a spotlight. So you can align these to the particle. Now, that actually doesn't do anything here because we don't have any particle alignment. So let's get the alignment node, and we won't cover how it works, but we'll just briefly go over it. So now these are all moving in their respective directions of travel, and we'll invert that so that they will look away from the direction they're traveling. So now they can light up this object. Okay. So that's adding the alignment. So now these will align to the clone. So if we don't have that, they will just look in one direction. Again with the boy band. All right, so now we're going to make sure that's not visible in here. Cool. So now we have our light renderer and align to clone, and we have a target object. And we can also make sure that these point at a target, and that's just by dragging that in. And again, let's go ahead and make these spotlights. You know what? It doesn't work. Weird. I think that needs to actually apply like this. Anyways, ignore that for now. We have the alignment node for that. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. So, little bug we'll fix. We'll take that out or update it. That is possible to do, but because of how we set it up, I used the wrong setting. Anyways, okay, so that's how you render those. So now we're going to delete them. Now you've seen these blue particles the whole time. You're probably wondering, what the heck are those, Sam? They're getting in the way, they're confusing me, they're getting annoying. Well, this is particle group A. That is the static MoGraph object. If you haven't seen how to make that, go ahead and check out that video. But that is being rendered, in this case, with Pyro clusters. Yay! So this is a great way to make clouds and things like that. So we're going to use our ABC light. Our other light was for the hair and everything. The ABC light is for the Pyro clusters and things like that. I think that's because it's brighter and it has a shadow map that was more suited for it. So in this case, if you want to learn more about Pyro cluster settings, actually check out my my cloud training videos for the TP cloud generator. But the density is way too high, so it's not looking good. So there we go. Turning that down. It looks like this giant cotton ball. You could use some settings to make it look more like clouds with different material settings, but this is going to use Pyro clusters, so those are great for rendering things that look more like a floating dust particle. So if you set that particle radius to 1, maybe 2, those look a lot better for a dust particle. And then you can set the density to 1, and now they really look good for a dust particle. Okay, cool. So we'll turn that off and turn off that render. Now we're going to talk about the geo renderer, and that's going to be using the B group which is just a simple emitter emitting out in this direction. These are all spheres, okay? And these are all just spheres that are cloned on. You can use the geo renderer, and it is a great tool to do that with, to use to clone. I gotta start over. It's a great tool for cloning geometry to your particles. You have your geometry, and it's very simple. You have your sphere, which is rendering instances of that sphere onto these particles in particle group B and all of their subgroups. So if there's a group below called group Chancho, or we'll call him Steve. This is group Steve, and he's red because he's angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. So that group would be applied as well. Another option is a cloner object. This is actually my preferred method, but it's not the only option. So in this case, if you have, say, a cube that is applied as a clone to these objects, you can use the particle scale to change the scale, and you can also use the velocity stretch. So when they are moving in a direction, they will stretch along that direction. You can really push that, by the way. It looks pretty cool. So, in fact, I'll probably really push that up. Some of them don't look very good. But anyways, and there's actually this really stellar example on Vimeo, rendered with Arnold, made in Softimage. If you've ever seen it, if you know what I'm talking about, that's actually something you could do with velocity stretching. So I'll even pause it and show you a link of the video. So you can look this up on Vimeo. This is a fluid simulation. I believe it was taken from RealFlow. No, it's from the EM Fluid for Softimage, which is all discontinued now, sadly. But you can use thinking particles to stretch along velocity and use alignment to help move in that direction. So if a particle is moving in this direction, you can use the cloner to stretch along that. And then also there's the P shader. I think that's actually, I'm not sure, that might only exist now in the TP or in X particles, but don't hold me to that. But this plugin called P-Shade is really great for using velocity to change the color or other things like density and age of different objects. So just keep that in mind. That's pretty cool. So now we're moving boxes along the particles. So that's great for moving boxes. You can actually use like an animated rig of a bird and have flocking birds move across. And something I've actually tried to study, I haven't actually done it yet, but there's this thing called a motion system. And I think you can control those with either Python or Espresso. And you could technically build kind of like how a video game works. You can set it up so that if a bird's moving in a certain direction, it will have, and in a certain, I guess, if a bird's falling, you can say, don't flap your wings. And if a bird's moving up, you can say, flap your wings. That's how animation works in video games. You can have different animations and it can blend between them. It's something you could try looking into. That could be pretty cool. All right, and the last one. That's our GeoRender and cloners. Okay, the last thing is this exciting thing called Metaballs. So it's a great way to skin objects pretty easily. If you want a good fluid simulation, I really recommend Houdini or RealFlow. And if you have Naiad or Maya, you can use Bifrost. Things like that for simulations and skinning. But in Cinema 4D, our options natively, or in this case, with this preset, or I mean plugin, we're using Metaballs for skinning. And this is a normal Metaballs object. So let's go ahead and let me take you through this and show you how I made this. So this is a material like such, just using a gradient right here, applied to a Metaballs render object, and then I've I've tiled the U and the V settings for the render. Alright, so we have our particle group, which is just a simple emitter right here that emits with these settings in this axis, which is emitting these particles, which then in this case, turn into little spheres. This is a particle radius, is what we call it. So that is the radius of the particle. So it will take the radius of the particle, which is that sphere, and multiply it by the size of the particle, which is controlled dynamically in the dynamics object, as we talked about in an earlier video. That will allow you to create these little, I guess, objects that will blend together with Metaballs. You can check exponential fall off or uncheck it if you have exponential fall off on. Let's go ahead and turn that up. And if you tweak the whole value, a higher value with exponential fall off is going to pull all the particles in and kind of squish it more. And the editor subdivisions need to get turned down. Turned down for what? You may ask. And that's because the particles look like dirt if we don't. They're just super jagged. So we had to fix that. So another thing we can do is turn exponential fall off. And that will actually, it won't, the particles won't get as small. But again, we want a smaller subdivision setting. The smaller these get, the longer it takes to calculate and render and simulate. So just keep that in mind. But if you set it to, say, 15, you won't be able to actually see what's going on. So you got to balance that. You got to be able to see it, and you have to be able to simulate. So there you go. So your particles are now going to functionally move along this axis and blend together. So if we pull this whole value down, set it to like 25, it's going to get way, way bigger. It's going to like bloat together. So if we set it to 500, however, they're going to pull together. So what it's doing is it's taking these objects right here, these spheres, these little particles with their radiuses applied, and it's taking that and saying, all right, I'm close to this object. We're going to kind of blend together and bloat out. So in this case, there's a lot of bloating. So, but it looks cool. And then you have your Fong tag applied to it as well. So you can set that to, say, 1, and you're going to get this lower poly look. So something to keep in mind, you have that ability to control the Fong with this right here. Okay, you can turn the angle limit on or off depending on your desired needs. And edge breaks, which is part of the Fong tag. So we're going to set that to 1. Okay, so that is the TP Metaballs renderer. And let's go ahead and look at this. So we talked about the geo renderer, cloning as well. And then we talked about the hair renderer, the light renderer. Actually, we talked about those first. Then we talked about the Pyro cluster renderer, and then the Metaball renderer. Okay, so that is how you render particles. Some ways you can render particles in Cinema 4D. I also cannot recommend Krakatoa enough if you do a lot of particle work. It's super cool. It's fast, lightning fast for rendering millions of particles. It's one of my favorite plugins. It's a great caching system. It's definitely worth looking into getting. And it's expensive. It actually costs more than X particles, but it's worth getting. I definitely recommend it if you're actually going to use it. So that is just some of the ways you can render with thinking particles in Cinema 4D. And you can get creative with other things like the Uber tracer and things like that. Go ahead and just look up thinking particles on Vimeo, and you can find a lot of other exciting ways to render thinking particles, very creative things. And if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down below in the comments. Thank you for watching this video, and go ahead and check out the rest of the series on thinkparticle.com. You can also find the TP Toolkit there and pick up your own copy. And thank you for listening. I'm Sam Welker, and I will see you guys later.